Welcome to the Sensitive Shift Podcast. We're your hosts, Agathe and Anna, and we are highly sensitive people. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the Sensitive Shift Podcast, where we will both celebrate the beauty and goodness of being a highly sensitive person, while also keeping it real and talking about some of the challenges and ways we have found to adapt. Our mission with hosting this podcast is to create a space where you, the listener, feel seen, welcome, and where you can learn more about sensitivity and highly sensitive people. Anna, hi.
Hi.
This is exciting. It's been a long time coming, and we're finally here. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling so good. So happy to be here with you.
Yay.
So happy to talk about one of our favorite topics.
Yep.
Yeah. And today, our pod is going to be divided into two parts. So, in the first half of today's episode, we'll share a little bit more about ourselves, your hosts, and tell you the story and our why behind the creation of this podcast. And then in the second half, we'll share some key terms and concepts about sensitivity that will lay the foundation for the rest of the season. We'll be discussing sensitivity and other related topics in greater depth in upcoming episodes. And without further ado, we'll hear a little bit about you, Agathe, and I'm wondering if you can start by telling us about one of the ways your high sensitivity shows up for you today.
Well, it shows up obviously in so many different ways, but I can tell you about a very specific way because it's been quite present in the past few months, in the past year for me, and it is in the activity of driving. If you know me and you know my driving history, you know a big story about me, but I'm not going to get into it today. When I'm driving, it's this stimulation from so many different input of information. It's visual information, it's auditory information, and then I have to simultaneously manipulate a machine that I am hyper aware can cause harm, and it's going fast, right? Like I'm used to walking. When I'm walking, I have time to look around me, to know if I want to stop. I stop. If I'm running, it's going to take me a little bit more time to stop, but if I'm walking, I can stop right away. When you're behind a car, it takes a little bit longer to stop a car, and I'm very aware of that. So I would say that very fast over arousal and hyperactivation of my senses is one of those ways that I feel my high sensitivity shows up. So it's very much about my nervous system. Feeling very deeply is one of the first ways that I realized that I was highly sensitive. And in the past, especially, my emotional reactivity was the strongest way that my sensitivity displayed itself.
I can't wait to hear more about those stories.
Little
Agathe.
We have so many.
And tell us a little bit about the profession that you chose, so the career path and how that relates to sensitivity, if it does.
Well, let me tell you, there's so much that we can say about highly sensitive people and career choices, and we will. But very shortly, just for the sake of introducing ourselves, I can tell you that I wanted to do so many things with my life, and ultimately, I would say I've had two distinct career paths that I've actually been able to merge together. And the first was a career in the arts. I really liked everything theater, cinema, music, dance, and then a little later in life, painting. And I was going the cinema route when I decided that I actually didn't have the personality to make it, in quotes, in that world, in the show business world, because, and what I mean by that is that I was actually too sensitive, not competitive enough. I often felt taken advantage of, and we also realized that talent was often only a small percentage of your success in that world. And so I decided to leave that career path, and I chose to go more in mental health because I also felt that I needed to do a profession where I was helping others. And because of my sensitivity, I also very much developed an interest for understanding why why I felt so deeply all the time. So mental health became, and psychology became a strong interest. So I studied psychology. I also studied theater. And
Mm.
um, and so I chose a career in mental health counseling, but I found a way to do it with integrating the creative arts. And so I went into creative arts therapies, which was a beautiful marriage of what I loved so much about the arts, which was more of the healing component, appreciating the beauty of the arts, and helping others, helping myself by going into psychology and mental health. And so that's how I came to become a creative arts therapist. Yes.
Wonderful. And because I know you, I know that you have a specialty that I think
Mm.
is really interesting, specialty and relevant to sensitivity. Would you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, I think you're talking about specializing in trauma informed work or
Yes.
lens or approach. So when I became a therapist, I really had a huge interest in trauma. I chose to specialize in trauma, and at the time when I was a clinician, it was mostly in trauma treatment. But then I also developed an interest in prevention in the form of trauma informed care practice or lens.
Mm.
Um, I don't really like to say that I'm an expert or a specialist because I think that's a big word. I don't think we can ever fully be experts in something, especially when it comes to human sciences. So I like to say
Mm.
that I'm in constant learning and improving and evolving, and that people are experts of themselves. And I just come in and try to provide some guidance and learn from other people as well. But to answer your question, trauma informed work is relevant to the topic of sensitivity in the sense that the assumption that we make is reverse. So that means, let me explain. That means that we're operating in a world where we interact with people in casual and formal settings with the implicit assumption that people haven't experienced adversity or trauma of any kind. So it could be personal, it could be systemic. Whereas the trauma informed lens recognizes the prevalence and impact of trauma on individuals and groups and can help adapt the way that we interact with people and systems. So, an example of that could be something that a lot of people might relate to, and it would be, for example, going to the doctor and being asked to remove your clothes for a physical exam, and then being touched and probed with the assumption that because you're in a doctor's office, this is normal, this is okay and expected. A trauma informed approach or a doctor who is trauma informed could put in place various strategies and operate with the assumption without necessarily knowing that's not necessary, that the patient may have gone through some trauma and that this normal procedure could in fact be very upsetting. So that's just a very, very large overview of trauma informed care or trauma informed lens. And of course, there's so much more to say, but
Mm. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think we'll have many opportunities to revisit your specialty, because it's going to come through in all of the stories and all of our episodes.
Yeah.
We're going to have themes of these, and you'll bring your expertise. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, and we'll explain more later as we describe how we got to create this podcast, how we integrate our professional life as well to this vision. So it will be relevant. And on that note, Anna, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what you do, because I know that you also work in a
Yes.
helping profession.
Yes, we have that in common, and
Mhm.
is how we met, actually. I am by profession today a dietitian, a registered dietitian, which I think for me is the, best career in the world, and such a good match for me as a person. And I actually started out wanting to be a therapist. I have a degree in psychology first, and then a degree in dietetics, which I sort of switched to after realizing that I think that was a better match for me.
Mm.
And I'm so excited about food. I'm so excited about the idea of nourishing our bodies, and about supporting people in doing that. I'm also an intuitive eating counselor. So I'm certified as an intuitive eating counselor. And intuitive eating, I think, has been, quite popular in recent years. But I'll just say that intuitive eating is really this, like it sounds, this dynamic integration between our mind and our body. And the principles of intuitive eating really work by either cultivating or removing obstacles to body awareness, and really are centered around listening and responding to the messages of our body. And that requires attunement. So we can see the connection between, and I see it now kind of looking back, between me being really aware of my body and at first believing that this is something I could really help others to do, and really believing in how beautiful it could be when we're in harmony with our body
Mm.
and our sensations. And I realize we all have different abilities there, and different sort of goals there as well. But that's been a big part of my professional journey, to understand that and bring that to the world of nutrition.
I love that. And there's so much more to say here, even in the interaction between your work and my work. And that's going to be so fun to discuss. And you're talking about awareness, Anna, and I'm wondering
Yeah.
if you could tell us a little bit more about your first discovery, your first awareness of your high sensitivity.
Mm. Well, I think I would say that my first introduction to the term, and first kind of knowing or accepting that I was somebody who was highly sensitive, came from an interaction that I had uh, in basically a therapy session. So with my therapist, and I had been for probably months and definitely weeks before that, famous appointment, been talking about different things that either bothered me or brought me joy, describing what I wanted, what I thought I needed, like all these different, the typical things we talk about. And my therapist really saying, I think you might be a highly sensitive person.
Oh,
And
you.
yes, so then we had this term, and I was like, is this a diagnosis? Like, what does this mean?
Mm,
And so I, finished that session and had as homework a podcast to listen to, a movie to watch. There was kind of fun homework, but just kind of a deeper dive into, what is this term? What does it mean for me? What does it mean for the way I might need to make changes in my life
mm,
to live my life with more ease and more quality. And I read what I needed to read, watched what I needed to watch, and it resonated so much for me. And I think that's part of the reason that we have this podcast is to be another voice that's talking about what it means, how we're thriving, how we're also sometimes struggling.
Yep.
I'm looking forward to talking about all of that today.
Yes, perfect. And so am I. And there's so many things that you said that I'm joining you in that. And, as we're answering these questions, I come to think about how complex and layered the topic and trait of sensitivity is, because it is actually, in fact, a personality trait. You talk about, is it a diagnosis? We'll just explain all of this in a little bit. Um, and we talk about the beauty. You spoke also about the challenges in these introduction, and who we are is inextricably embedded into our experiences of sensitivity and that trait. So, and I'm wondering if you would be willing to share with us a little bit about how you identify and whatever that means to you right now, and whatever you feel comfortable sharing with us.
Absolutely, sure. So I think to have a sort of an image in mind, putting an image to the voice that we have today. I'm a cisgendered woman. I am of mixed heritage. I'm part of both an ethnic and religious minority, but I'm born in Canada. I do identify as Canadian. I'm very proud to be Canadian and that's funny. I was journaling this morning, and one of the things I journaled about was a little gratitude entry.
Mm.
And something I wrote just maybe an hour ago was that I was grateful for my sense of physical safety being in Canada today with sort of the global context and different things that are going on. So I am also a twin. And I'm very grateful for my family. I'm
Ooh,
part of a,
twins.
yeah, I'm part of a really lovely, very loving family. Um, Growing up as a twin, I think has been a really big part of my identity.
Mhm.
And, I always think about sort of having somebody with whom to share
Mm.
so many experiences and having that really be such a big part of my support system and my sense of self. I think about like holidays and birthdays, getting gifts. And those gifts were always, my parents have this saying there that we would get gifts that were the same but different. So we would both get a sweater but in a different color. Or we would get, a bracelet and mine had a little A on it and my sister would have her initial on it. So I'm I feel very privileged and very lucky in my identity and how I've lived my life so far. That's a little bit about me. And what about you, Agathe? What would you like to share about how you identify?
Well, I'm just going to say thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. And I think there's so much of what you're sharing that I relate to. And I will share that I'm also a cisgender woman. I am white. I identify as, I like to call it, a middle culture child, so, or person. And that for me means I'm both from France. Maybe you can hear it in the way that I speak. And I'm also Canadian. And for me, that has shaped also a lot of how I have navigated life and perceived the world around me and myself. Um, and I had a conversation with a friend not too long ago, and we were discussing that topic of cultural identity, and we had a very interesting reflection. She was mentioning how our language often reflects that when we present being of multiple heritage, we often say we are half of one place and half of another. And in fact, that's kind of diminishing and minimizing what we are, when in fact we are whole, and we can be a whole of one place and a whole of another place. And it's not because it's a little different um, that it's lesser than. And I really appreciated that, because it's true that language often shapes how we view ourselves, how we view others, and experiences are different when you are from different identities or different places. And of course, we could talk about so many of these identities. And you mentioned religion. You mentioned, we didn't mention actually ability. There's so much that we could talk about, but we really wanted to touch on this topic because it is relevant and important for us in the way that, first, we want you to get to know us a little bit better, although you will have a lot of occasions to as we go through these episodes with you, but also and importantly, as we will come to explore in this podcast, we do share commonalities in our identity, Anna and I. And one of these is the trait of being highly sensitive. But this trait exists in interaction with the complexity and entirety of who we are as people and the lives that we have and continue to live. And we want to acknowledge the privileges that come with many of our highlighted identities. And we also want to honor the areas where we experience challenges or adversity, and how our sensitivity has played a role in all of those. We also want to recognize and validate that everyone will have a different experience of their sensitivity based on how they identify, um, because it will majorly impact the way that they navigate life. And we also want to say that you may relate to us at some point and you may not because of that. And we always welcome you in this space. And we hope that you do feel that and you feel validated as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree. Very well said. Thank you.
Thank you.
A little bit about our why for the podcast today, for our season, and a little bit about our story now. We were first coworkers and we quickly became friends. We talked about our
Yeah, we
sensitivity.
did.
Yes, we did. So we also happen to um, live very close together. So
Mhm.
it just so happened that, I mean, we work in the same office or worked in the same office, and then we would finish around the same time and then walk in the same direction. And so we would have conversations pretty much daily for
Yeah.
several months. And this was around the time that I was really kind of discovering sensitivity and was reading and had all these homeworks to do. And Agathe, I confided in you, I think, because of our friendship, because of your expertise, because I knew you had this expertise, and then realized that you were also highly sensitive. And then a beautiful, beautiful conversation and friendship was born from there.
Friendship.
Yay. Yeah, I think we understood each other. I think we felt heard by each other, and we have a lot of things in common that we liked. That's sort of what started this all. And I think Over time, we discussed these topics so often and we loved our conversations, and we wanted to share the kind of conversations that we were having through a project like the podcast. And part of the reason was that we felt we also would have and could benefit from kind of normalizing conversations about this topic when we were younger. And we wanted to feel like we could contribute to that movement and call people into our conversation and share with others these topics that are so, I think, important and close to our hearts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It would have changed my life if I had heard something like that out when I was in my teenage years. It would have. So the reason, like, I'm actually going to talk to you about who this podcast is for. So maybe you are a teen who would benefit from hearing this and hear nothing is wrong with you, really. And a lot of the books that we read, the articles that we read, will say that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll have some of that exploration as to why a lot of the topics around or the conversations around sensitivity relate to negative feelings and feeling weak or feeling that something is inherently wrong with us. And that's because of a whole framework around the meaning we have associated with being sensitive. So, who is this podcast for? So, of course, if you are highly sensitive and you know that you are, we're so happy that you're here. You're
Welcome.
obviously more than welcome. And we hope that you feel validated, nurtured, lifted, and celebrated, as is our goal with it's our goal with each other, with Anna and I. And this podcast is also designed for those who are a relative of a highly sensitive person, a partner to a highly sensitive person, a friend or a coworker of a highly sensitive person. And we hope that you find this podcast insightful, interesting, and intuitive to help you better understand and support these HSPs for short in your life. The podcast is also for those who are completely unfamiliar with high sensitivity and sensitivity itself. But as it happens, sensitivity is a personality trait that exists on the spectrum, and we all place somewhere on there. So technically, you are sensitive in some way if you're listening to this. Um, and we can all benefit from learning about sensitivity and how to honor and care for it to become better and more attuned humans.
Yeah, we know something about you if you're listening, that you're interested in this topic, and that makes you part of our little community. So, welcome to everyone.
Come sit with us.
Come sit with us. And a little bit about what to expect in terms of topics, and in terms of what our discussions will be about. The term HSP, or highly sensitive person, in the research is still relatively new, although it's believed to have been researched for a long time, just under different names or terms. And so, for that reason, it's still relatively mixed. But we thought it would be most pertinent to bring to light some of that research throughout our episodes, and to accompany that research with both of our personal and also professional experiences. So you'll be hearing a mix and a nice blend of all of those.
And in terms of tone, as we stated in the beginning of the podcast, the goal is to celebrate sensitivity, but we will also be speaking about the challenges that come with being highly sensitive. So, clarity, hope, relief, education, empowerment, and of course, hopefully, a bit of humor is on the menu for you.
Mm.
Okay, Anna, are we ready for some defining terms?
Oh, yes, we are.
Okay, this is the meat of the potatoes. So the term highly sensitive person, which we will say HSP for short a lot of the time on the podcast, was first coined by Dr. Elaine Aron around the mid 1990s. It's also called sensory processing sensitivity. As we will see, many of the features of the trait are linked to the senses and heightened awareness to processing subtleties. Like we said, sensitivity exists on the spectrum. We have high sensitivity, which is where highly sensitive people place, which is believed to be between 15 up to 30% of the population, which is a lot. It's a personality trait. It is too high of a percentage to be considered a disadvantage or a disorder.
In order to help us define the characteristics of being highly sensitive, we have this handy dandy acronym, DOES, DOES. The D here, we start strong with depth of processing. Depth of processing is the foundational trait. And really, what this is processing information around us and processing it deeply. And processing information is something that every person can relate to. You can imagine that if you were given a number to remember, like a phone number, we will try and find a way to remember it. And we might try and notice some patterns in the number. We might try to ascribe some meaning to each number or clusters of number. We might visualize the number or repeat it over in our head. And this is really what processing is. Without processing, the number would just be forgotten. And HSPs tend to have this kind of greater depth of processing than average on the spectrum. They will notice, relate, and ascribe meaning to aspects of their environment and the senses, to past experiences and emotions and other similar things. And that processing quite literally takes time, and it takes brain energy and waves. And we can see that on brain imaging studies. And that means that there is what Dr. Elaine Aron calls this pause and check reflex. And so this really is the act of taking in a great amount of information, kind of like pausing during the processing, checking before making a decision or acting on what to do next. The O of our handy dandy acronym is overstimulated or easily overstimulated. And this is exactly what it sounds like, right? So if we imagine someone who is noticing and processing information throughout the day, ascribing meaning, having emotional reactions to it, it seems only natural that we're more likely to, or more quickly, feel overwhelmed, overstimulated, or just worn out faster. This is actually the only sort of quote unquote negative aspect of the trait, because really what we're looking at is the neurotransmitters in the brain and the body get worn out more quickly. To someone who is around the HSP or in relationship with the HSP, that might be sort of what you first notice or see sort of on the outside the most easily. But it's important to remember that being easily overstimulated is not a central aspect of the trait. Being an HSP isn't about being overstimulated, but rather being more prone to overstimulation is the result of this greater depth of processing. So that first characteristic. I'll also add here that being overstimulated or overwhelmed is something that can be quite universal. So everyone can feel this. And many people can complain at one time or another of sensory overload or feeling overwhelmed. What distinguishes the HSP is really that this depth of processing at the level of the nervous system is the precursor. Our E stands for emotional responsiveness and empathy. And emotional responsiveness really means that the HSP will react more strongly to both positive and negative stimuli or experiences. And there's actually brain imaging studies that show sort of HSPs or sort of lower sensitive individuals. They're shown faces displaying strong emotions, and then we scan their brain. And HSPs tend to display and react to these emotions more on average. They will notice even the subtle changes in body language or facial expressions of others, and again, ascribe meaning and process those more deeply. Being in tune with others' emotion actually helps HSPs to be more empathetic because they feel those emotions as well. And the link here, I think, is sort of easy to imagine between depth and processing and emotion. And finally, last but not least, we have the S, which represents sensitivity to subtle stimuli. And I'll draw a parallel here. So, just like overstimulation is the trait that others notice about the HSP, sensitivity to stimuli is often what the HSP notices in themselves. So that means the HSP will often notice that they feel or see or smell or hear things that others are not either noticing or complaining about, that others might not be sort of as in tune with. HSPs might be, for example, the first to say like, "Hey, like, do you guys hear that noise? Like, is something beeping?" Or "Do you smell something?" Or, "Oh, hey, you styled your hair differently today. That's really beautiful." Um, and it's not so much that the HSP is sensing more. So, not necessarily that their nose smells more or that their eyes are
Mm-hmm.
just seeing extra far, right? Many HSPs, for example, wear glasses. But it's rather that once those senses pick up on these details, we actually see that the brain areas of HSPs are more active in response to those same stimuli. So, for example, if an HSP says, "Do you smell that? Like, is something burning?" And everyone in the room starts trying to actively smell the burning, they'll also smell it too.
Mm.
Um, but the HSP has kind of noticed something was off, and probably integrated, if it's burning, probably integrated like, is this dangerous? Do we need to pay attention to this? Right? So sensitivity to subtle stimuli then is about sensing and ascribing a subtle meaning, connection, or pattern to the stimuli. Hence why it is called sensory processing sensitivity.
Mm. It makes so much more sense then when you're explaining all of this, Anna, why I was explaining to you why driving felt like such an intense activity.
Right. Right.
Because of all these stimuli and having to process all this information that's coming through my vision, and then understanding what I'm doing by operating a machine that's going faster than when I'm walking, so I have less time to process. And usually my reaction, especially when I was starting to drive, my reaction was to hit the brake so that I could have more time to process. And I remember getting yelled at by my instructors being like, "What are you doing? Just go." And I'm like, "No, I need to think about what's happening."
Yeah.
Oh my
Yes.
goodness.
And when you were describing sort of the sense of responsibility
Mhm.
around like vulnerable pedestrians, and there was a lot of meaning and emotion that was involved in your driving experience from the way I understood how you
Mhm.
described it.
Yeah, it's tricky because then like not moving fast enough can also be dangerous. Yeah, it's so tricky, but
It's so tricky.
we're getting there. We're getting there.
Exactly.
Um, some more things we wanted to add about sensitivity is that it is a trait that is culture dependent when it comes to being understood and accepted. So that's definitely something that's going to be embedded in our conversation. In our Western culture, it's often mislabeled as shy or introverted. However, sensitivity is innate while shyness is learned. And then we'll have a bit more of an explanation for introversion. We'll see other intersections with other personality traits. However, like for any other person, some highly sensitive people might intersect in some of these traits, but it's not inherent to the HSP trait. We'll also see that many of the traits that are mislabeled for highly sensitive people, or that highly sensitive people are called, tend to have a historically negative connotation and be more undesired. That some of those are shy, introverted, although that one has made strides in its reputation, inward, depressed, neurotic, weak, and feminine. And we have a lot to say about that. What I appreciate from Dr. Aaron's work and definition of highly sensitive people, and something that you also highlighted for us, Anna, is that she's conscientious about explaining that this trait has advantages and challenges. Being highly sensitive can be a gift, just like any, but it can also be anything but positive to some people. And this is how she puts it. And we're certainly not saying that being highly sensitive is superior in any way. I know Anna really said that as well. Not being a highly sensitive person does not mean that you don't display qualities that are associated with being sensitive, such as being understanding or being aware or having empathy. And something that's really interesting is to note that in an optimal state, highly sensitive people might be more prone to picking up on nuances. However, when they're overwhelmed or over aroused, they might not be able to display qualities like empathy. Whereas someone who isn't a highly sensitive person but has a quality of empathy might be more apt to display it even in a chaotic or overwhelming environment.
Very important, I think, and relevant. Thank you for describing that, because absolutely it exists on a spectrum, and HSPs, when optimally stimulated, will be a very different look than an
Mm-hmm.
overstimulated HSP, just like an
Mm-hmm.
overstimulated anyone, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, we have examples of that happening
Oh,
between the two of us, so
yes, we
we
do.
know.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah. We can get frazzled. It
We can get
happens.
frazzled.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of concludes our research-oriented segment for this first introductory podcast, and we wanted to jump into our segment that is a bit more fun, a bit lighter, and every episode will have one of those, whether it's a short game, some rapid fire question. We want to keep it fun and light if we can, and also interactive if possible. And so this week we'll be doing a myth busting game, and you can play with us bi-weekly by following us on our Instagram, which is at Sensitive Shift Pod, and participating in the myth or truth game in our stories. And here on the podcast is where we'll give you the answers in a bit more details. So Anna, are you ready?
Oh, I'm so ready.
Yay. Okay, your myth or truth is highly sensitive people are high maintenance.
Yes, could we could see where this comes from and where we could fall into this trap. The answer is that this is a myth.
It's a trap.
It's a trap. Don't fall into the trap. HSPs do not equal high maintenance. Are these terms can sometimes be used interchangeably, unfortunately, but they're not interchangeable. They mean different things. So the term high maintenance really refers to someone who requires a lot of resources, so attention or time or effort, in order to maintain their happiness or well-being. That's different than being a highly sensitive person, because a highly sensitive person we just described is someone who is really aware of their surroundings, emotions, and other people's feelings more than the average person. So absolutely, it's possible for HSPs to be high maintenance, just like it's possible for people who are not HSPs to be high maintenance. And I hope that that helped to clarify the difference.
Yes. And also, we just want to say that if you need things, you can need them. It's okay.
Oh, yes. Neither of those terms are
Yeah, nothing is
like,
inherently bad for
no,
us.
no.
It's just what it is.
We're just defining them so that
We're
we know
just,
the difference and we don't get confused.
yeah.
Yeah. To you now for our second
Go
myth
for
or
it.
truth. Is it true or false that HSPs cannot thrive with busy lives?
Well, I can see as well where this would come from, that thought, but it's also a trap. So it's also a myth. Um, People might think that a busy life would equal poor performance or poor quality of life when it comes to highly sensitive people, because it comes from the idea that highly sensitive people are more easily overwhelmed or overstimulated. But it's not really about the quantity or quality of the work. It's more about needing an optimal level of stimulation, and that will be different for anyone or everyone. And it's the same thing for highly sensitive people. In that case, it's more about how are we going to take care of our busy life. So you can have a full calendar as long as the highly sensitive person knows how to care for their sensitivity. So that might mean more time, more downtime, more time on their own, and more time to recharge the way that feels nourishing to their sensitivity, particularly. But the busy life can also be a busy, fulfilling life. It just depends on what everyone wants.
100%. I can definitely relate to that. I think our listeners might relate to that too.
A reminder that you can join us for games and to learn more on our Instagram at Sensitive Shift Pod. And at the end here, we will like to do an HSP minute where we will close with a moment to share a discovery or an intention for the week to care for our highly sensitive person in the
Yes.
spirit of having a busy life.
In the spirit, exactly. Agathe, would you like to go first? How did you or will you nurture your sensitivity this week?
Well, I just bought a week ago or a couple weeks ago, a new book on surprise sensitivity.
We're
So
shocked.
we're shocked. So I'm going to be reading that and continue to take notes, take care, feel validated, feel nourished by the fact that other people care about that topic, are here to
Mm.
continue dismantling the meaning that we have associated with being sensitive in our world today, and continue to do some of this work myself. So, a book, and the
Beautiful.
book is called Sensitive by Jen Granman. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing her name correctly. And André Solo. So if you're
Fantastic.
interested, it's a great book so far.
Well, I'm sure that some of those themes will find their ways into our discussions. I hope they will.
Yes, they sure will.
Your opinions and reflections on what you learn and read about.
Yeah. And Anna, what about you? How will you, or how did you, if you prefer to speak in the past, nurture your sensitivity?
Mm. I was looking forward to the HSP minute because I'm pretty
Tell me.
excited that is it download or installed not one, not two, but three new apps on my phone.
Whoa.
Uh, varying from two of them are primarily meditation apps, and
Mm.
one is sort of like a journaling, like an AI facilitated therapeutic journaling app. And I
Oh.
have used those, all three of them, for the last, I want to say like 3 or 4 days. And I'm absolutely loving it. I'm having so much
Oh.
fun discovering. I don't know if I'll download more or pick the one from the three that I like the most, but it's been so fun exploring my own mind and reflecting. So I'm gonna keep doing that.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. We do want to end with a quick disclaimer that while we're discussing contents that are related to personal wellness, they do not constitute advice. We acknowledge that each experience is different, and if you're looking for specific support, we encourage you to consider professional support individualized to you. Next episode, which will come out in 2 weeks, hopefully, we'll do a bi weekly release. We'll be on the topic of growing up HSP and childhood insensitivity. It's going to be a fun one.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye.
Bye.